In this video, I'm going to show you how to make my buckwheat sourdough loaf. This is an existing recipe on Fresh is Real. We're not changing too much, but we might do a couple of different tweaks to make this recipe even better and easier for you to make at home. I'm going to make this a two-part video, the first part being the recipe, and the second part will be the bonus video where I'm going to be answering a few questions to help you make this recipe at home. My starter is nice and active and it's bubbly and ready to use. To begin, we are going to mix the ingredients right away because we do need to let this dough rise for a couple of hours, if not a little bit more. I'm going to be making 2 batches of this dough today because we are going to test some variances as well. There is an older video up for this recipe, but it's kind of short and I wanted to do like a longer video so I could explain a little bit more of the process. We're going to begin with putting the first ingredient, which is the buckwheat flour, because this is the buckwheat sourdough. And then for this video, I've roasted the sunflower seeds, but today I'm also using pumpkin seeds. So by roasting them, you're just kind of like enhancing all the flavors. What I did is I just used my cast iron pan on a low heat and I just roasted them until they kind of got golden and started popping. And once that happens, then you just want to let them cool a little bit and then use a blender or a spice grinder to help transform the seeds into a fine flour, but you do need to sift it, so make sure that there's no little chunks. We're including arrowroot starch, but you could use tapioca flour if you wanted to, and I haven't tried it, but maybe even cassava flour would work because it's quite starchy. In a pinch, potato starch would be another starch to try. And then we're going to be adding the brown rice flour and the oat flour. There's always ways to modify this recipe to make it work for you and your family if you have allergies, because this is a gluten-free and vegan loaf. But definitely you can tweak it to make it your own if you're not sure. I love answering your questions about this recipe either in the video and or directly in the recipe post. The recipe post is already on Fresh is Real, like I said, but it's a little older, so I will be making some updates to it to make it even better and easy to read and understand. We are also adding 2 tablespoons of whole psyllium husk. And yes, you can use the powder, but you would need to use less. I use whole and it works for me, so I just keep using it. I'm also including 1 tablespoon of coconut palm sugar. You don't need the sugar, but it does kind of help ferment everything once you've mixed in all the ingredients. It does make it, I don't know, it does help a little bit, and it helps with the flavor as well. Last but not least is the sea salt, and you need salt, I think, in a bread recipe, because if not, your bread would be kind of like bland and not taste that great. Oh, and I wanted to add too, my recipe so far is listed in cups, but I finally weighed all my ingredients, so in this edited version, you will have the weight. I'm gonna just sift it as best as I can. And then you're kind of left with some little bits, but you know what, that's okay. And now you want to make sure to mix your ingredients really well. Because the psyllium husk is going directly in the mixture, you don't want it to get too clumpy in some spots and not others. So by mixing it all, you just kind of help to distribute all the ingredients in all the right places. And go ahead and measure out 1 cup of the starter. And I'm gonna do a close-up of the starter because it looks really good. I fed a whole bunch of my different starters, and this one is the one that I'm going to use because it's super happy and super bubbly. And this is my, well, it says best gluten-free starter, but I think they're all good. They're just very different. I can hear the popping. It has like a perfect aroma of wild natural yeast. It's not an exact science. In this case, I'm actually not weighing it. I'm just pouring it, and I want 1 cup. Go too much, but I think it looks like I could use a little bit more. And then for my other loaf, I will be needing another cup, of course. I'm gonna go ahead and add it into my bread recipe. Last video is doing really well, but it's kind of short. So I wanted to just do one that was a little bit longer to show you maybe a little bit more about this recipe in case you've tried it or in case you want to try it and you just really want to make sure you do things right. I'm gonna Right away, add 1 cup of warm water. It's not hot, it's just warm. Using spring water or filtered water works best. You don't want to use water that has chlorine or other city yuckies in the water. I need to invest in a really good filtration system. I think it's the Berkey. I don't have one, but I do know people that have it and really like it. Another tip I'm going to do, and something I'm going to change for the instructions in the recipe, I do call for 1.5 cups to 1 3/4 cups of water, but I'm reducing it. I'm going to say 1 1/4 cup and maybe up to 1.5 cups for the edits, because adding more water does create really nice open crumb, but at the same time, people's loaves are baking kind of flatter. They go up a bit and they rise, but then they kind of like flatten out. And ideally, we're all trying to, you know, create the perfect round loaf. We don't want it to go too flat. By reducing the water, it just kind of helps keep things together a little bit better. And I'm gonna make those suggestions to you too in the recipe post. I'm going to go ahead and add 1 more quarter of water, so for a total of 1 1/4 cups of water, and start with the 1 cup and mix it. But you'll see you'll be left with some like dry bits of ingredients, and by adding that additional 1/4 cup, it'll just be just right. Once I've finished mixing this for today, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you 2 different ways you can let your dough rise. But in the meantime, I am just going to let this sit for a quick second. I'm going to mix my other bowl of ingredients, and then I will come back and show you how to transfer both in 2 different types of either bowls or a basket. This is bowl number 2. I just went ahead and sifted all my ingredients. I'm just going to mix them. I'm going to go ahead and use another starter for this one. The other recipe will not have any sorghum, and then this recipe will have a sorghum starter. The other one has a brown rice starter. If you've never made a gluten-free sourdough starter before, I have a couple of videos and a recipe post to help you, so I will make sure to include those notes in the video description. And if you have any questions about those, don't be shy to ask away. And another thing that's really helpful too is I do have a Facebook group, and if you're not a member yet, please ask to join, because this is another perfect area where you can go ahead and ask questions to me and other bakers in the group as well. Same with this loaf. I've used 1 cup of water, but I'm going to go ahead and use the remaining 1/4 cup, but I will not go above the 1 1/4 cup total. By reducing the water just a little bit, it will help your loaf maintain the shape. And then somebody had a question the other day, is why do you need to do a free form loaf with this recipe? And you don't need to. You can bake this in a loaf pan if you wanted to. Perhaps that should have been one of the variations today. For now, I'm just going to show you how to transfer the mixed dough to a banneton basket. And I recently purchased this one, and I've been trying it out just to see how it works. It's fine. The reason you can use this, it's like just kind of easier to flip your dough out. In my first video, I put the dough mixture directly in the soup bowl, but then you kind of have to like scoop it out, and it's a little bit harder. By putting a clean tea towel into your bowl and then putting the mixture in here, I do that for some of my other recipes, but I'm going to go ahead and do it for this one too, because you'll see if you've tried this recipe, or if you've been wanting to try this recipe, it makes things so much easier once you're about to flip it over. We will leave it somewhere warm in your kitchen, in your house, and then we're going to let the dough rise for at least a couple hours. You could go longer, but because I'm filming, I'm not going to go too much longer today, because I do want to show you how well this loaf will work. There's a couple of things I could have done at this point. Is I could have sprinkled some flour to make it easier to pop out. It's not completely necessary. You'll see it'll come out fairly well without it, but I can do it for the banneton basket just so we have a way to compare what does actually work better. So this is the first one. It's as simple as that. If you have a large Ziploc bag, you could insert that in the bag. It's not entirely necessary, but this is it. You're creating a nice little bundle of love in a soup bowl, and you're covering it with a clean tea towel. So what I do is I try to keep a few clean tea towels around that are just for bread baking. That way they're not like contaminated with like other things that could potentially harm the growth of the loaf. The next one I will show you, I will just put a really super fine dusting of flour. This is buckwheat flour. And in case you haven't seen me use this before, it's actually a tea strainer, but it works really, really well. Bowl number 2, everything is the same, except the starter is a sorghum starter. So yes, by doing that, I'm introducing another flour. I'm actually finding this batter a little bit runnier than the first one, but the sorghum starter was not as thick. So I'm gonna go ahead and, yep, I'm literally pouring this in. So it's not a dough that you can manipulate with your hands. This is a batter-like mixture. Which is why when you bake it free form, it has a higher chance of just kind of baking up nicely, but then potentially falling flat. And then we're gonna let these 2 loaves rise for a couple of hours. I'm kind of finding this one a little bit more jiggly than the first one. The first one was not like that. The first one's a little bit more firm. So maybe that one will help maintain, or will keep its shape a little bit better. And you know what? If you had a loaf like this and you're like, oh my gosh, I've put too much water, you know what? Just flip it into a bread pan, and then that way you don't risk the chance of it baking up nicely but then kind of falling flat. So you could rise it in a basket and then just flip it into a bread loaf pan for baking. I'm going to clean up. I'm going to let these 2 loaves rise for a couple hours. We are ready to bake the beautiful buckwheat sourdough loaves. So I've got 2, and we're going to bake them slightly differently to compare. This is the loaf that has the sorghum starter, and then this one here is the loaf with the regular brown rice starter that I call for in the recipe. I just want to try both to see which one does better. Today we're going to bake this one in the Dutch oven because it seemed like it contained more water, but it could be fine once baked, who knows. This one is the texture that I'm used to because I typically use the brown rice starter anyways. These loaves have been rising for 2 hours. There's not much rise with them, but that's kind of to be expected at the 2-hour mark. If you wanted to experiment and let it rise for 3 to 4, that's fine. For this specific loaf, 5, 6 would be okay too, but I wouldn't go any more than that. I would start with trying it for 2 hours and then bake it, see how you like it, and then make your tweaks. When you experiment with this recipe, always take notes, grab a book, grab a binder, take some notes, and always keep track of what you try for one bake as opposed to the next. For the first loaf, this one, I used the Banneton basket. It does have a little liner, but all I do is kind of simple, is I will be flipping it onto the parchment paper. And once we're ready to go, I'm gonna move fairly quickly. So we'll start with the one and then we'll move with the next. I'm gonna do a mist on this one because it was already pretty wet. Once it's in the Dutch oven, I'm gonna mist it and then put the cover on and transfer it to the oven. This is a olive oil and water mixture. And then on the next loaf, I will just use a brushing of olive oil. Also, another little trick that I do is I try to just do a little sketch of what my plan is for the scoring, because if you have an idea of what you're going to do ahead of time, it's less stressful when you're there ready to go with the blade, and you don't have to score it. Just one line is nice. If you do a little bit more, that's also cool, but it's entirely up to you. So I'm going to put it here as a reference because I'm just gonna go with the super simple, I don't know if you can see it, pattern of one line and a few extra lines around it. Typically when pulling this up, you want to be careful because every loaf is different. And the next step would be to remove the Dutch oven from the oven so it's ready to go as soon as we are ready to transfer. I'm using the bigger Dutch oven because my loaf is longer. If I was making a round one, my smaller Dutch oven would have been fine. So this is a 7-quart Dutch oven, and because it's been preheating, it's super, super, super hot. So for this one, I said I was gonna do a mist, but I'm gonna do it as the last step. So I'm not gonna dust it with flour. We're gonna leave it as is. I'm gonna go ahead and do a simple score line. And this, it's not like a wheat loaf. It doesn't score the same. So I'm just using actually the fine blade of a scoring knife. I find when it's on the actual knife itself, it's curved and it doesn't really work well for me. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in here, and this is where I'm gonna spray the loaf with the olive oil and water mixture. This is just to see for my friend if it's going to help soften up the crust a little bit or if it's going to make it crispier. So that should be good. Don't forget to put on your gloves when you put on the cover because it's extremely hot, and then I'm putting this in the oven right away. Just for today, we're going super basic, so I'm not placing it on the baking stone. I just want to show you how it's like when you don't have one. And then I'm going to remove my hot or preheated, just a regular good old cookie sheet. When I say cookie sheet, a regular cookie baking sheet. And this is what we're going to place the next loaf on. And again, this is super hot, so you don't want to touch it. But I want to see if just going super basic will be equally comparable. And we are going to cover this loaf with a piece of foil, because I'm pretty sure everyone has foil. If you didn't have foil, you could just use an oven dish that's like safe at higher temperatures, and you could use it to cover the loaf. We're going to proceed in flipping this loaf onto a piece of parchment paper. I will include a link to this parchment paper because I swear that's all I use. And you're going to remove the bowl, carefully remove the tea towel, and see how easy that was. In my first video, I just suggest putting it without the tea towel, but the tea towel makes it super helpful. We're going to score it similarly to the other one. You want to go deep enough that it opens up nicely, and then I'm just gonna do a few little markings around, and I'm gonna do the same thing this way, and that should be good. And this one, we are going to brush it with just olive oil. So in this case, I'm not going to mist it. I'm actually, and I hope you can see it on the other camera, but I'm just going to give it a brushing. I want to see if this is going to soften up the crust or if it's going to make it crispier. What do you think? If you have a guess, let me know. But that's all I'm going to do for that one. You're always going to bake this on the middle rack. So on the lower rack, put another baking sheet, and then you're going to put some ice cubes or pour a little bit of water to create some steam. So in my case, this is a brand new oven. There is a little tray for water, so I'm just going to try it for the first time. And then I'm quickly going to dome my bread. I should have done that before, but I'm basically covering my loaf with foil, and we're going to cross our fingers and see what happens. So we're going to do 25 minutes covered, 25 minutes uncovered, and then we'll judge because we can bake it directly on the rack for 5 to 10 minutes to finish the baking. So let's see what happens. The timer just went off, and I think we're done baking. So we're gonna take the loaves out of the oven and see what they look like. Are you excited? So these loaves look a little bit different than my original buckwheat sourdough loaves, but that's because we've changed a few things. That's okay, because every time I bake this recipe, I always try something different, whether it's like dusting flour or brushing them with oil or not, or misting water or not, baking with steam. There's so many variables. So this is the loaf that I baked with the sorghum starter. It felt a little bit more like jiggly, the dough, but it looks good. The crust is crispy. The bottom sounds like it's supposed to sound. This one is with the rice starter, but it baked on the baking sheet and it's a little bit darker. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but we will see when we slice them. Right now, they need to cool for at least a few hours. This is the first one. Can you see the inside? It looks really nice. The crumb is nice. It's not sticky, but it's still a bit moist inside because it's still warm. And this one is as nice. Bonus video, and then we can chat a little bit more about the differences and what I think as far as the crumb and the texture and the flavor. I'm happy, and this was a little bit experimental, but it's just to show you that when you bake a sourdough, you don't have to have the fancy, tools or whatnot. You can go super basic and still have a pretty decent loaf. But you know what? It's good to show you what you can expect, with your first bake, your second bake. I've baked hundreds of sourdoughs, and they're different every single time. And hopefully this will give you a chance to love and enjoy bread once again. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you watch part 2, which will be the bonus, where I'm going to be answering some questions about this recipe. So I thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel so you can keep watching more videos just like this one. And I will see you in the bonus video, so don't forget to watch it.